Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Sorry. My name is Andreas Fonseca. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I'm also CEO and co-founder of Thrive. And with me is Elisa. Elisa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa Macris, and I'm a business psychologist at Thrive. Thank you for joining us today.
So we have, there's a QA function. If you can find the button in your screens, so you can submit questions as we go along, and then we'll probably answer them at the end. If there's any burning questions, we'll be monitoring it, and if it's appropriate to bring them into the discussion as we go along, we will. There's also a chat function if you need to message us directly. We will be recording this webinar, so if you want to share it with colleagues later, that's absolutely fine. We will be sending you the link to it. So thank you very much for joining us. Our aim is to try to explain what meditation actually is and what are the potential uses that it may have in people's lives. As an overview, we aim to explain how meditation is not only about living in the moment, as it might be commonly understood. For example, for me, it's important to note that the exercises that we do to train this skill are not the skill itself. While people experience, doing meditation, that experience in itself can be grounding and quite helpful. I perceive the benefit to be in the fact that doing those exercises improves our ability to, for example, control our attention. I'll talk more about that later. And also I value the insights that, from a first-person perspective, that I gain about how the mind works. And that also has applications for me outside of the times when I'm doing a meditation exercise. Elisa, do you want to explain how it is for you?
Yeah, sure. I agree with the insights about how the mind works. That's really helped me as well. But for me also, the really important part of meditation is about learning to live in the moment and to really not get emotionally involved in past mistakes or future worries. So I tend to be quite harsh on myself if there are things that I feel I could have done better, or if there's a goal that I want to achieve which comes with more challenges than I thought. So really, meditation for me is about finding appreciation and being grateful what I already have in this moment, because otherwise I would always be focusing on what is missing and never really feel happy. So I feel that in the end, the way we define meditation is really unique to every person, and that's what makes this practice so powerful for everyone.
Yeah, so if we look at those, the two fronts in which this training can deliver, the way the mind actually works is one of them. Again, the mind is doing what Elisa was describing kind of all the time. Is kind of its natural state, is looking at what can go wrong in the future, perhaps, and is looking at what we've done wrong in the past as well. So this thing that the mind does is actually normally concealed from us, but meditation is a technique that can help us understand it better. So it's very useful to allow us to stop judging ourselves and others too harshly, basically echoing what Elisa was just saying. So when we see how the mind can get lost in thought to the point that we lose perspective on what is actually going on as a whole, I think we understand it better, and we should be able to not be deceived by that kind of illusion that it kind of tends to project on us by default. So the other one is that it enables us to notice when our attention has been captured by something, like, for example, a worrying thought about the future, or a thought about what we could have done better in the past, for example, or things that may happen in the moment. For example, we lose our temper, that we realize that we've been caught up in the moment, our attention is being captured, and we are reacting in a way that we wish we hadn't after the fact. And we say, well, that was silly. Why did I get so worked up about that? If I'd been paying attention more closely to what was going on, I would have not done it that way. So just that ability to perceive that our attention has been taken up by something, and then to disengage and be able to pay attention to the whole situation, can be very useful and enable us to get better at choosing what we actually want to do, rather than act on impulse and later regret it. So it enables you to stop having those regrets about how you acted, because it gives you better control in the moment after you've completed some of the training. So in order to get there, we need to explain a little bit about the nature of perception and of consciousness. And then we'll explain what we mean by attention control, this thing that we've been talking about, and finally discuss what the different forms of meditation are and what potentially they can teach us. We will then summarize the potential benefits of training in this skill. So my first task is to demonstrate to you that all that we perceive, feel, and think happens in the same place. So what you perceive and what you think is located within the same space. So what we see, what we hear, what we smell, and what we're thinking is all in the same place, and is all created by our brains. Yes, we do take information from the outside world, but we don't see what is there. What we see is a model that our brain has created of what may be out there. The brain does this for good reason, as the information from the outside world is extremely noisy, and the brain needs to clean it up to make sense of it. And in many ways, we don't perceive what is there, we perceive what we expect to see there. A quick example of this is that we all have a blind spot in each eye, which is the size of 10 full moons in the night sky, but we don't even notice it. If you experiment with this, you will realize that what the brain is doing is filling this gap in our vision using the information from the visual field around it and painting over it. So there's a way in which you can do this by looking at two thumbs, one in front of you, one to a side. It's about 10-15 degrees to one side, and if you're focusing on the with one eye only, focusing on one of your thumbs, and move the other one around 10 degrees to the right, and you will see that the tip of the thumb will disappear. Sorry, to the right for the right eye, to the left for the left eye, and you will see that the tip of the finger disappear, and it becomes covered with whatever is around it. It's a very interesting experience if you can do it. So the brain does this sort of thing all the time. So people who are blind from birth then have their vision restored, even though the vision is perfect, the perception side of it, the sensor side of it, the eyes work perfectly. They have a hard time perceiving what they see, as their brain has not formed the concepts that enable it to see something like an apple or a car. All they see is a model of colors and shapes, and nothing quite makes sense until they develop these concepts, and then they can make sense of that perception based on what they expect to see there. So here's a picture to complete my point that I put on the screen. So this picture looks like a bunch of dots. Yeah. Well, if you look carefully, you might see that there is a Dalmatian there. So once you see that Dalmatian in the picture, you can never unsee it. This phenomenon is the same that happens when you hear a song backwards for the first time. So if you just hear it with nobody telling you what to listen for, it's just noise. And then if somebody gives you some subtitles for it, gives you some words to put to those sounds, then you can never unhear them. So then every time you hear this song backwards, you always hear the words that you were prompted to hear. So there is this internally generated space that is formed of perception, but those perceptions heavily depend on our expectations. Thoughts and emotions are in the same space as those perceptions, even though we commonly think as perceptions as coming from the outside. And thoughts being more on the inside. So if you're scared, you will be much more likely to see a neutral patch of shadow as a potential attacker than if you're feeling very calm. Then the patch of shadow will just be neutral. So let's do another quick example, sort of a quick experiment, perhaps, to illustrate this point. So I want you to keep your eyes open and to imagine a red candle on a white candlestick standing there on whatever surface you happen to to be looking at. If you have got a table or a desk or something, just imagine it standing on that surface. So try to imagine it as vividly as you can. So if you can see the light of the flame dancing on top of it, that's great. Maybe you can even feel the heat coming from it. You can imagine or visually perceive, even sort of vividly imagine the burning wick, the redness of the candle, maybe the whiteness of the candlestick. And you might even be able to smell the scent or picture the wax slowly melting and dribbling down the candle. So some people can conjure up very vivid images, while others are only able to bring up a ghostly semi-transparent image of the candle. In any case, what just happened is that you projected an object onto the real world. So it was happening in the same space. So you were seeing this surface, that this information coming from the outside world, but also you generated this imaginary object occupying the same space as the surface that is standing on. This thing is happening all in the same place. So that should give you all the evidence you need that both the surface that you're looking at and the candle are actually in the same place, the same space of consciousness. In there, you will also find your thoughts, your emotions, body sensations, and all the information from all the other senses. So hopefully I persuaded you that all there is the contents of that consciousness. So now let's talk about attention. So attention is like a spotlight that focuses on a specific aspect of the contents of consciousness. So the internal experience is sometimes that nothing else exists but whatever is caught in the spotlight. And then even to the point that nothing else is of relevance. So it can be, when you're focusing very intensely, your attention is very captured by something, everything else kind of fades away. So when it gets attached to something, it tends to narrow the world quite dramatically and stops us from seeing outside of it. So the normal process might start with an event or a perception. So that information that we perceived, or that event, gets filtered and interpreted and presented to you as reality. So this can be labeled, this experience, this whatever happened, can be labeled as exciting or funny or often threatening. So those threatening ones can come from internal dialogue only. It might be about going over something that happened in the past or something that we dread happening in the future. Once that happens, most people immediately accept what our attention has attached itself to. So that thing that we're focusing on is immediately accepted as true, as real. And and that is actually the most important bit of reality. And we get lost in thought without even knowing it. We'll see later how meditation can help us become aware of when and how our attention has been captured in this way without us necessarily wanting for it to be captured that way. So one important thing to note is that the space of consciousness that is all that we have access to at any given moment is not the author of those thoughts that may capture our attention. So let's try and observe this process now with another experiment. For this one, I'm going to need you to close your eyes. So hopefully you're all closing your eyes now, and as you do that, I just want you to take a few breaths in and out, and again in and out. Take another few breaths, just in and out. Try not to force them, just let them happen. So I want you to try and stop completely controlling your breathing and just observe it, just let it be by itself. Don't try to make it faster or slower or deeper. Just whatever happens, happens. Just let it be. But I want you to sort of be paying attention to it, to that process of just naturally breathing. So try and pay attention to the sensations that it creates in your nose. maybe the air passing the back of your throat, or maybe going into your chest and coming out of your chest, or maybe the movement of your stomach as you breathe. And I'd like you now to carry on doing that for a few moments on those sensations that I've been describing. Just focus on those. And we just now at some point, as you focus on those, you'll notice that you become distracted, maybe by a thought, by a noise, or a sensation somewhere else in your body. So two things to consider now. If it happened to you, did you decide to stop paying attention to your breath, or did it just happen? So you probably didn't decide to stop paying attention to your breath. Your attention just got captured by something without you noticing or even wanting it. The other thing, if it was a thought that captured your attention, did you decide to think that thought, or did it just present itself from somewhere? One more quick experiment to illustrate this point about thoughts. Okay, think of your favorite film. So as you do this, I want you to pay attention to what is actually happening when you do this. So there might be a few films that surface in your consciousness somehow. You don't have the experience of remember each and every film that you've ever watched and being able to evaluate them and choosing one. It's not like you see the whole catalog of everything you've ever gone to see. So now that's happened, so a few came up from somewhere. It was not the whole catalog, it was only a few. And then somehow one of them presented itself as your favorite. And now ask yourself, why is that one your favorite? So what happens now, if you pay attention, is that you'll have a bunch of reasons that come up, again from somewhere. For most people, these reasons did not come up until I asked about them. They did not feature when I asked you to think about your favorite film. You didn't go through a list of reasons, a list of criteria to choose your favorite film. It just, a few films presented themselves. Only after I asked, why is that your favorite film? Then these thoughts have started to emerge. So the films felt right, but you didn't pay attention. What happened now is that you formulated those reasons after the fact. That's the normal experience. So one last thing. Was your favorite film Gladiator? So I'm sure some of you have watched it. It might have been a worthy candidate for consideration. It won quite a few Oscars, but for many of you, probably didn't even come up. But it might have been a contender. You know, if you think about it, it just didn't occur to you that one should have featured in the list. So how did that happen? Maybe you had thought of it. Maybe you know, maybe you would have chosen it, but you didn't have the experience of looking through every film in the catalog. So that goes to show that what is presented at first blush is probably not all there is, even though you may automatically assume that it probably is. So it's a silly example, but it happens all the time. So if you think of reasons, if you think of this, if you think of that, only a few of the whole list of things that are possible or relevant presents itself. So I now want to show you how the contents of what we're paying attention to can change our emotions. Remember that normally we have not decided what has captured our attention. It just happened to capture our attention. Same with the breathing exercise. If you remember back to that, you wanted to pay attention to your breathing, but something distracted you, your mind went somewhere else. So I'm going to hand over to Alyssa for another exercise.
Yeah, so the first attention exercise will be on loving kindness. So sit comfortably in a chair and let your eyes gently close if you would like. Then breathe in for a moment until you find a relaxed rhythm. Now turn your attention to a neutral sensation, perhaps the feeling of your feet touching the floor. Notice the sensations, the pressure of the sole of your feet on the floor or warmth, anything you might be feeling. Now think of a person who you are close to, someone you trust or makes you feel at ease. Picture this person in your mind and reflect on how this person makes you feel, contemplating that you wish them well and inwardly hold in your thoughts that you feel grateful to them. Let the feelings of caring and kindness build within you as you do so. Now think of a person or a situation that annoys you. You have probably thought a great deal about all the things that bother you about this person or situation. Pay attention to how your thoughts and sensations have immediately shifted from pleasant, calming ones to more unpleasant and stressful ones. Do you feel a difference in your physiological arousal? Has your breathing become more shallow or your heart rate become faster? Now bring back your attention to me. You might have experienced now that physiological and psychological arousal can be brought about by merely the content of your internally generated thoughts. Your thoughts and the attention that you give to them can guide your affect. Creating awareness of this can help you to separate attention from arousal, allowing you to accept your experience with calm attention, even when it might be painful, traumatic, or negative. Now take a moment again to close your eyes and think back to the person or situation that annoys you. Consider the possibility that there is something that you can appreciate. Perhaps there is something you can learn from this situation or person. Or maybe you have overlooked a positive aspect among all the negativity. Try to develop feelings of acceptance and compassion towards this person or situation as well. It might be harder to do so, but this will contribute to your well-being. Maybe in doing so, your emotional arousal has shifted to a calmer state again. So just to sum up, in this exercise, you actively altered your emotional state just by changing the contents of your thoughts and the attention that you give to them. In the last part of this exercise, you were encouraged to separate the content of your thoughts and the feelings that it brings by taking control of these emotions and shifting them to more positive ones, while still having something negative in your mind. If you have managed to do so, you have successfully separated attention from arousal. So this brings me on to meditation. There are a range of techniques that enable you to perceive how your attention is being captured and how to control it better. As said before, meditators are able to remain calm and alert, as well as aware at the same time as they are relaxed. So there are 3 types of meditations: focus, open focus, and non-focus. I'll be going through a little bit about each. Focus meditation involves concentration of attention. Attention is narrowed down to a single point. This helps us to train attention at will and hold on to something chosen without getting distracted. If you notice that you're getting distracted, that's normal. Just gently guide your attention back to the point of this exercise, to the focus that you're paying attention to. There are several ways in which your attention can be trained like this. Through sensory perception, by focusing on our 5 senses, for example, touch, by sensing an object that you're holding in your hand or sensing the temperature in the room that you're in. Sight, for example, eye palming, when you cover your eyes with the palm of your hands and let your eyes relax. Or truly seeing, where you try to notice every little detail in your environment which you might not have paid attention to before. Sound, by listening as you speak. How do the vibrations of your voice feel in your body? What pitch do you speak at? Or deep listening, such as listening to every word in a song. There's also taste. Through active tasting, you pay attention to the food you are eating and notice exactly what each bite tastes like. And then there is smell. This is done by noticing aromas when you walk through a garden or your house or a supermarket, anywhere where aromas might be changing, which you might not have paid attention to before. Another way to capture attention is by noticing body sensations, such as breathing, which you have done before, or pulse awareness or heartbeat awareness. Lastly, there's movement, such as yoga and Tai Chi, which enables us to have a better understanding of the mind-body connection. These exercises, such as sun salutations and deep muscle relaxation, bring about a bottom-up calming sensation, energizing the body through movement and breathing. Importantly, different poses elicit different emotions, such as the warrior pose is for confidence and strength, while the child's pose gives a sensation of self-soothing and security. These are all examples of embodied cognition. By changing your physical sensations, you influence your mental state as well. The second type of meditation is called open focus. It's mostly about mindfulness, being fully present, fully thoughtful, and deeply immersed in the moment-to-moment experience. Mindfulness is about paying attention to the present moment. Opposed to focus meditation, here attention is free to move to whatever emerges. For example, compassion meditation, which is what we practiced before in the loving kindness example. Compassion meditation varies depending on how your thoughts are directed, on who your thoughts are directed to. Or open meditation, where ongoing body sensations are monitored. Mindful attention leads to a perspective of detachment from concerns and worries. There are 3 core principles to being mindful. 1, staying in the present moment. 2, being non-judgmental. And 3, accepting each experience as it is. I'm going to guide you through another example. I'll give you a personal example of open focus meditation. For me, waiting for something for a long period of time was always one of my pet peeves. I often go sailing with my family, and during these trips, there's usually an instance on the boat when the weather is calm, the water is flat, and the wind is gentle, without any land in sight for many miles. Meaning that we would spend hours on sea, seeing the same thing around us, without much to do, really. I would just look at the horizon, trying to not preoccupy my mind with thoughts like, when will we get there? I'm so bored. How many more hours? I'll just look out and be in the present moment, accepting the time I would have to wait. Learning to appreciate this moment of calm and nothingness. So that was my personal experience of first practicing open focus meditation without being consciously aware of it. Maybe if you think back, you'll find a time where you might have done this as well without really noticing. So lastly, there's non-focus meditation. This is objectless meditation. This involves directing attention to nothing, noticing when thoughts arise and just letting them go. The aim is to become a detached observer of thoughts and emotions. It's like sitting at the bank of a river and watching your thoughts and emotions swim by without letting them sweep you away into the stream. It is the free flow of thought without any particular direction or purpose. Imagine the water channels in Venice. Have you seen the pictures of how clear they have become now that the gondolas and boats are not stirring up the mud anymore on the seabed? You can now see all the sea life that always existed in these waters, which we weren't able to see before. Stillness really clears the mind. So finding stillness helps you to see things that you might have not been able to see before. Andres, I think you have also an example of clouds, if you would like to go through that example. Or
yeah. So it kind of is the metaphor that helps me explain it to people. So when you're doing this objectless meditation, I think is one of the most useful ones. It takes quite a bit of practice. So basically, it assumes it's very hard to do it to start off with. I think you're always better off doing one of the more focused ones, one of the ones where you are directing your attention to a particular thing and then noticing when when your attention is being captured by something else, and then gently bringing it back to the object of your attention. The point of doing that exercise over and over again is that you learn you learn the sensation of your attention being captured by something without you wanting it to be captured. So once you become good at it, then you start to be able to sort of not have a focus for your meditation. You're simply perceiving thoughts, emotions, sensations, everything. So you see what your attention automatically attaches to, and then once you perceive that, you let it go. You sort of say, oh, I noticed that my attention is being captured by whatever it is. So for me, the clouds example is, so if you're lying on your back in a garden and you're looking up at a cloudy sky, it's not a completely overcast sky, but there's some, so there's a blue sky and there's some clouds in the sky. So there's this big fluffy clouds. And then you're looking at them, and then at some point, without you even wanting, one of them looks like, I don't know, like a ship, or maybe like a whale, or something attaches itself to the shape of the cloud, some kind of meaning, some kind of perception. And then you notice that it's become this object in your mind, but you also notice that it's actually a cloud. So once you're able to shift between the perspective of it just being a cloud to being this object that you imagine, and back and forth. So, and you see the clouds gently drifting by, and then meaning attaches to them, because of their shape as they float by. But again, you're able to sort of still realize that they are simply just clouds, even though meaning is getting attached to them. So you're able to also shift your perception down to, yeah, no, it's just a cloud. It's not really a ship or a whale or an airplane or what have you. So I think that helps me explain it to people, and some people get it when I give that example. Okay, so we talk a little bit about the benefit. So I mean, the main benefit is that you get those skills that I've said, but basically, once you have those skills, what are the uses of them? So indirectly, it gives you a tool to explore the human mind from a first-person perspective. So by doing experiments similar to the ones that we've done during this session, it might show you how your mind actually works rather than how you assume it works. So this may give you greater insight and compassion for both yourself and others. What comes up to consciousness is presented as all there is, and you tend to get lost in that. So you may now notice how that process happens and might be able to explore it, thereby gaining greater insight into it.
Yeah, it also leads to better management of attention by helping us to consciously separate attention from arousal, as mentioned before, really allowing us to observe experience with calm attention. We do this by training our attention to focus at will, while accepting any thoughts or emotions that arise and then really letting them go. Also, meditation and mindfulness enhances emotional and self-regulation abilities. Troubling feelings can be better understood, and emotions are quieted. As said before, meditators have the ability to be calm and alert at the same time, helping them to be more effective at problem solving and making constructive, helpful decisions for ourselves. So Andres has an example where he used mindfulness to get out of an annoying situation. Would you like to talk about the car incident?
Yeah. So last year I was involved in 3 small accidents. Basically, they were all the same. So somebody driving into the back of my car, and I remember particularly distinctively the last one in that series, where somebody had driven yet again into the back of my car. And the first thing that happened is that I got extremely angry, because it was like, oh, why does this have to happen to me again? What sort of an idiot is doing this? All of those thoughts came rushing in. And of course, my attention immediately got attached to them. Now, the thing that I value about meditation is that as soon as my attention got attached to that pattern of thinking, which was making me angrier and angrier and more annoyed, I noticed that my attention had been taken up by these thoughts without me wanting to. So I was able to sort of say, okay, so is that really helpful? Is it going to be helpful for me to deal with the situation if I'm extremely angry and I behave terribly to this other person that maybe, I don't know what's going on with them. They may be in a rush because they are sort of trying to care for an elderly relative that is in trouble, or they may be rushing to help to help with their children, or they may be in some kind of an emergency, or they may be sleep deprived, or they may be unwell in some way that I'm not aware of. So why am I immediately judging them? Why am I immediately feeling like I've been deliberately victimized in some way? just because it's happened to me 3 times in a row doesn't, this is completely random. So I was able to kind of detach my attention from those immediate thoughts that had happened that would making me feel more and more worked up. And I was able to calm down in the space of about 30 seconds, which is how long it took to the other driver to get out of the car and come to talk to me. So by the time the driver came to me, I was able to sort of be a rational person and was able to be helpful to both the other driver and myself in dealing with the incident. So I felt that was a great benefit to me, to be able to sort of do that and calm down and actually act in a reasonable way and solve the problem quickly. And I was pleased that I didn't react in anger or in irritation. I think that gives you a good example of how these skills might be helpful. Okay, so Alyssa, do you want to sort of sum up for us?
Yeah, sure. So we talked about consciousness, and perception, how everything is around us is basically constructed within our minds, how everything we see in the outside world and the inside is within our perception and consciousness created within, how our attention can be shifted through arousal as well as our internally generated thoughts, such as the loving kindness experiment that we did and the candle experiment that we did about creating images within your mind and presenting them on the outside world. Then we went through different types of meditations, 3 different types: focus, open focus, and non-focus meditation, each of which have their own benefits, but are quite different to one another. And as Andres had mentioned before, it's really useful to start more with focus meditation or open focus meditation, because you're able to focus your attention on something specific rather than non-focus, which might feel a little bit abstract at first. And then we talked about the different benefits that there are, such as emotional regulation and being attentive but calm at the same time.
Yeah, and also understanding how this process of our mind work. For example, if we pay attention to it, we don't really decide what thoughts pop into our head. It's just something that gets served up, and if we understand that process better, we're able to not just accept the first thoughts that just popped up into our consciousness, and don't necessarily accept those as a true representation of what's actually going on. If we're able to sort of stop ourselves from getting lost in those thoughts, then we're able to sort of think more broadly and perhaps not get caught up in the initial thought that happens, similar to what happened to me in that accident. So the immediate thoughts were all about me being some kind of a victim and the world being a very unfair place. But when I realized that I was getting caught up in these thoughts, I was able to disengage and then think about the situation more widely and what is the most useful thing for me to do in that moment. So that gives you a good example of that. I also wanted to mention one quick thing about when you're looking at your body and it engenders different feelings, that embodied cognition experience. We mentioned it when we were talking about some of the forms of meditation. It's an interesting relationship that happens between the body and the mind, and I think is worth remarking on. So if you are quite downcast, for example, you adopt unconsciously a particular body posture. So your brain kind of orchestrates movements in your body that signify, that show that emotion that you are going through. You don't do this on purpose, it just happens. So some actors are very good at doing this, but most people, it just happens naturally. And other people around you sort of can tell your emotional state by looking at your body. But what's interesting is that it's a two-way relationship. So if you change your body posture, that has a feedback mechanism on the way you feel. So this is not perfect, and sometimes it's not, depending on your emotional state, it might not be all that successful. But in many cases, just adopting a different posture can actually have an impact on the way you're feeling by that feedback mechanism that I was talking about. Yeah, there we go. So
yeah,
we'll see some questions. Yeah.
Yeah, we have one question here. How do you practice compassion towards a person you feel deep resentment towards?
I think that is very challenging. But you know, I think Alyssa, you were talking about how deeply useful that is if you manage it. Do you have any tips?
Well, the point is really to detach your emotions from your cognition. So being able to find the positive aspects in a negative situation can be really useful for your own personal growth as well, because oftentimes we tend to overlook things as well. And Andres, when he mentioned his car accident, he was talking about the situation of the other person who crashed into him. Maybe this person was sleep deprived, maybe this person was going through some personal problems or had some issues at the time. So being able to reflect not just on your own situation, but how the other person is feeling and what made them do maybe something negative or something hurtful towards you, but being able to accept that and moving past it for your own well-being as well, to be able to find compassion and acceptance in situations that might be quite difficult. And the only way to really do this is by separating your emotional arousal from the negative thoughts that you might be having in your mind.
Yeah, for me, something that really helps in that situation is also realizing that the same way my mind works, their mind works as well. So they get served up these thoughts, they get, you know, their attention gets caught up without them even meaning to, you know, by whatever these thoughts that I get served, you know, get served up into consciousness are. They are lost in these thoughts, and they are reacting to them many times without meaning to, right? So you know, that compassion that you develop for yourself when you realize that this is the process that is taking place, that you know these thoughts get served up, and all of a sudden you're acting before you realize. You also realize that this happens to everybody else. So therefore, you know, if you develop a good insight into this, I think you're able to be much more forgiving, in that, you know, you realize that people do try their best for the most part, but they get caught up in the moment in the same way you get caught up in the moment by these thoughts that come from somewhere, without really realizing that you're getting caught up in them. So I think that's helpful as well, just realizing that that process takes place.
Yeah. Another question is putting yourself in other person's shoes an example of mindfulness?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So you might, it depends. So you might be doing an exercise where the focus of your meditation is trying to empathize. Of course, you don't necessarily know what the other person is going through, but you can imagine a series of scenarios for the other person and go through them in a similar way to the loving kindness exercise that Alyssa was doing. You can imagine this other person as they experience different situations, and they may again experience different reactions to them, and that might be helpful. That might give you some insights into how to feel about them. Yes, you know, is this reflection on trying to sort of develop this empathy and this compassion for others. I think compassion is a more useful idea than empathy. So if you get caught up in somebody else's emotions, so if you feel exactly as they feel, sometimes you might not be able to help them, because if they're feeling exceedingly sad and you understand the situation and you also start feeling exceedingly sad, that might not be the most helpful thing that you can do for them. But compassion might be a better way to think about it. So you understand their feeling, but you also remain, again, you remain, so your attention is detached from your arousal, so that you're able to act and perhaps help them and do something valuable for them, even if they, so it's not getting lost in their own emotions either. I'm not sure whether that's making sense, but basically you can get too lost in somebody else's emotion to be able to help them. So that compassion is similar to the same thing that you have for yourself when you're able to detach your attention from your arousal. Did that make sense, Alyssa?
Yeah, it definitely made sense. And as you mentioned also in the beginning, it really depends on what type of meditation you want to focus on, whether that's compassion meditation, whether that's more of meditation focusing on yourself rather than others. It really depends on what you prefer to do at the time. And yeah, like Andres said, just not to get lost in other people's emotions, because that's not going to be helpful for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose to try and answer the mindfulness angle to it, mindfulness normally, as a technical term, is reserved to the more open-focused or non-focused meditation. You know, is when you're not really, so you're just seeing what emerges in the moment, without really directing your attention to it. You know, it's not one of the focus meditations, is one of the open ones, is one of the either the open focus or the non-focus ones. Those that tend to be labeled as mindfulness, particularly the non-focus one.
Yeah.
Yes.
So any tips of embedding mindfulness and meditation in teaching?
In what, in a lecture, in a lecture situation, is it for children or is it for adults? We don't know. I mean, it depends on your objective. I think it is an important concept for people to understand, and it depends what you're trying to teach them, I suppose. If you're talking to them about health in any way, I think mindfulness is one important concept to learn. If you're talking to them about the way the mind works, is a good tool to have to actually help them learn about the ways the mind works, and particularly from a first-person perspective. It's interesting how the things that you discover when you meditate and when you look at these processes that the mind engages in detail, when you're paying attention to them, it does correlate with what we've learned through just academic research. So modern neuroscience seems to correlate, a lot of what we learn from modern neuroscience seems to correlate with the way we can explore our own consciousness through mindfulness. So that's interesting. So I don't know, Alyssa, what do you think? Any tips for embedding mindfulness in teaching?
Yeah, as we don't really know the age group that you're talking about, it's difficult to say exactly what would be most useful, because I'm guessing that if they're older, if there's older people, they would be more interested in understanding really how the mind works, maybe learning a bit about the neuroscience about it and all of that. Whereas if you're talking to young children, they might just prefer doing some mindfulness exercises, such as focus meditation, where they focus on certain things. So being more practical rather than theoretical. So it really depends on who your audience is and what you want to achieve with them.
One thing that we do know is that young children can do this. And they don't, interestingly, if you do a session with them, and particularly of one of the focus forms of meditation, they don't tend to get bored. They do tend to sort of get it, perhaps even more easily, in my experience, than older adults. So they are able to do these exercises, and sometimes people are surprised that they're able to sit quietly and pay attention to their breath, or with their eyes open to colors or to something, some kind of object of attention. And perhaps they are able to do that more readily than adults sometimes, which is interesting.
Yeah. So I think this person has said that they want to teach mindfulness to children and teens for revising exams. So yeah, as Andres mentioned, maybe going through some of these focus meditation exercises can really help them to feel calmer and more concentrated and more at ease.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you recommend any meditation apps or videos?
I mean, it's hard for us to recommend.
Yeah.
So there's a conflict of interest there, right? So in the Thrive app, there are meditation exercises, both focused meditation type exercises and more of the non-focused ones as well. And there's an unguided meditation that you can set up for yourself as well. And there's some of the body meditations, like we don't do Tai Chi or yoga in the app, but we do a walking meditation, for example. So that's an example of that one. For me, the one that I think explains the whole thing best is the Waking Up app by Sam Harris, who's a neuroscientist. So that one, for me, sort of teaches you. It's not just that it teaches you meditation in itself, but it teaches you about what it is and how it works in quite a lot of detail, and has, I guess, lectures by a range of teachers, and that might be a more in-depth look at this whole subject that I think some people might find helpful. Don't know, Alyssa, do you have any thoughts?
Not particularly. I mean, I use a lot of yoga to kind of incorporate my meditation into yoga. So I follow some yogis on Instagram, and then currently my yoga studio is also doing webinars over Zoom, which I follow and all of that. So it depends. So I'm more of like a yoga meditation type of person rather than using apps or videos. I think that's all of the questions that we have today.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. We very much appreciate your attention. And as we said, this will be recorded and circulated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.